Screams erupted as the meal cart overturned, silver trays scattering across the aisle as Eli Carter fell sideways, clutching his bleeding leg. The fork had punctured his flesh before he could register movement. Sharp, silver, driven deep into his thigh by a hand that belonged to Landon Price, the flight attendant now leaning close enough that Eli could smell coffee on his breath. Cameras were already recording, capturing every twitch of panic in Eli's eyes. What no one else realized, not even the man who stabbed him, was that this little boy would soon cause the airline's entire command chain to shift into crisis mode. In no time, the man who thinks he's in control would be dragged into the harsh light of truth. "You dropped it," Price whispered, lips barely moving. "Clean passengers don't make messes on my aisle." Eli's mouth opened. No sound came, just air, thin and stolen, while around them the cabin hummed with oblivious conversation. Price straightened, smoothed his vest, and walked toward the galley as if he'd merely retrieved a napkin. Pain arrived in waves, hot, pulsing, disorienting. Eli looked down at the white handle protruding from his leg, at the red spreading fast across his jeans, and his hands began to shake so violently he had to grip the armrests. Across the aisle, a woman glanced over, frowned at his pale face, then returned to her magazine. Someone coughed. The seatbelt sign chimed. "Help!" Eli whispered. The word vanished into the recycled air. He'd been so careful, boarded properly, found his seat without assistance, thanked the crew. His father worked for the airline, not that anyone here knew, and Eli had wanted to prove he could travel alone without incident. He was 13, not a child. He'd rehearsed confidence in the bathroom mirror that morning. Fear felt nothing like he'd imagined. It didn't arrive as panic or tears. It came as thickness, as weight, as the sensation of being glued to his seat while his leg screamed. Price returned carrying a trash bag, his smile bright and professional. He crouched, blocking the aisle with his body, and spoke in that same terrible whisper. "You're bleeding on the upholstery. That's going to cost you." "I didn't mean—" Eli's voice cracked. "If you tell anyone I did this," Price murmured, eyes locked on Eli's, "I'll say you attacked me with your own fork. You lunged at me. I was defending myself." His hand moved to the call button above Eli's head, hovering without pressing. "Who do you think they'll believe? The professional crew member or the kid who can't even keep his lunch on his tray?" Eli couldn't speak, couldn't move. His vision blurred at the edges. 2 rows back, Marcus Hale watched the exchange with mounting dread. He'd seen the jab, quick, practiced, brutal. He'd seen Price's casual departure, the return with manufactured concern. Now he watched the boy's face drain, of color, watched him shrink into himself. Marcus's phone was already in his hand. His thumb hovered over the camera. Heart hammering, he angled it low, pretending to check messages, and hit record. Eli counted breaths the way his mother taught him during thunderstorms. 1, 2, 3. He imagined landing, imagined telling someone, imagined being believed. Each time Price passed, Eli's shoulders hunched. Price noticed and smiled wider, a predator acknowledging prey. The cabin lights dimmed for the in-flight service. Eli pressed his napkin against the wound, but blood soaked through immediately. His hands were sticky with it. A flight attendant, younger, anxious-looking, paused at his row. She glanced at Eli's leg, at his face, then away quickly. "Excuse me," Eli managed. "We'll be with you shortly," she said, already moving. Marcus leaned forward, voice low but firm. "That kid needs medical attention, now." The attendant's eyes darted toward the galley where Price stood. "I'll inform the crew lead," she said, and hurried away. Price appeared moments later, all performance. "What seems to be the problem?" His tone suggested Eli was being dramatic. "He's bleeding," Marcus said. "I can see that." Price crouched again, examining the wound with theatrical concern. "How did this happen?" Eli stared at him, mute with disbelief. "Well," Price prompted, Did you injure yourself with the cutlery? The implication hung in the air. Eli felt the eyes of nearby passengers turning toward him, curious, judgmental. A self-inflicted wound. A disturbed kid. That's what Price was crafting. He didn't, Marcus began. Sir, please don't interfere. Price's voice hardened. You're disrupting crew operations. Marcus sat back, recording, jaw clenched. The captain announced their descent. Eli's vision swam. He tried to lift his hand for the call button and couldn't make his arm cooperate. Pain and shock had merged into something thick and suffocating. Price leaned close one last time. When we land, he breathed, you'll tell them you did this yourself, understood? Or I'll make sure everyone knows you're dangerous. They'll ban you from flying. Your father will lose his job, all because you couldn't handle a fork like a normal person. Eli's breath hitched. His father, Julian Carter, operations manager for Skyreach Airlines. Price knew, had known all along. The plane touched down. Applause rippled through the cabin. Eli sat frozen, watching passengers collect their belongings, laugh, stretch. Normal people having a normal flight. Only Marcus remained seated, phone still recording, eyes never leaving Eli's row. At the gate, Julian Carter stood waiting, tablet in hand, reviewing schedules. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He almost ignored it, then saw the text. Gate 23, your son, urgent. Julian's blood turned cold. He was moving before conscious thought caught up, shoving through the crowd, flashing his airline ID at security. His mind raced through possibilities. Illness, injury, panic attack. Nothing prepared him for what he found. Eli sat slumped in his seat, face gray, leg wrapped in someone's jacket. Blood had pooled on the floor. A paramedic knelt beside him while passengers filed past, some glancing back with morbid curiosity. Eli! Julian shoved past the flight attendant blocking the aisle. What happened? Eli looked up, eyes glassy. Dad! He had an accident with his fork. Price interjected smoothly, appearing beside Julian. We've already contacted medical. Everything's under control. Julian's gaze swept from his son's face to the wound to Price's too calm expression. Something was wrong. Eli wouldn't meet his eyes. An accident, Julian repeated slowly. Yes, sir. Unfortunately, these things happen. He was eating. The turbulence hit. There was no turbulence. The voice came from behind them. Marcus Hale stood in the aisle, phone raised. And it wasn't an accident. I recorded everything. The cabin went silent. Price's expression flickered, just for a second, before resetting to professional concern. Sir, recording crew members without consent. I recorded an assault. Marcus's voice was steady despite his shaking hands. I watched you stab that boy. I watched you threaten him. And I have proof. Julian turned to Price, and something in his face made the flight attendant step back. Show me, Julian said to Marcus. The video played on Marcus's phone. Even on the small screen, the violence was unmistakable. Price's hand moving fast, the fork driving in. Eli's mouth opening in a silent scream. Price leaning close, whispering, then walking away as if nothing had happened. Julian watched it twice. His hands were steady, but his jaw worked like he was chewing glass. When he looked at Price again, his voice was soft, deadly. Security, he said into his radio. Gate 23, immediately. Julian, let's discuss this, Price began. You're done. Julian stepped between Price and his son. You're done talking. You're done working. You're done. Security arrived in under a minute. 2 officers who took one look at Eli's leg and called for backup. Price's composure cracked. This is a misunderstanding. The boy's unstable. He... Stop talking. One officer moved behind Price, hand on his cuffs. Sir, turn around. You can't do this. I have rights. I have a union. The cuffs clicked. Price's face flushed red as passengers pulled out phones, recording his removal. He twisted toward Julian, desperation bleeding through his practiced calm. You're making a mistake, Ask anyone. I've been with this airline for 8 years. 8 years. Without incident. Marcus's video saved Eli. Your share could save the next kid. Hit that like button if you believe predators deserve exposure. Subscribe so you never miss stories that demand justice. And share this everywhere. Because algorithms reward engagement, and this story deserves to go viral more than another dance trend. Don't just watch, act. Then you're due. Julian didn't raise his voice. Didn't need to. Paramedics loaded Eli onto a stretcher. Julian walked beside him, one hand on Eli's shoulder. I've got you, he murmured. You're safe now. Eli's eyes welled. He said you'd lose your job if I told. Julian stopped walking, looked down at his son, at this boy who'd endured torture to protect him. His throat tightened. Nothing you could say or do would ever cost me more than losing you. At Denver Memorial, doctors confirmed what Julian had feared. The fork had pierced muscle, narrowly missing the femoral artery. Another inch to the left and Eli would have bled out before landing. The surgeon who delivered this news did so quietly, her hand on Julian's arm. He's lucky, she said. Incredibly lucky. Julian sat in the surgical waiting room, head in his hands. Lucky. His son had been stabbed at 30,000 feet by someone paid to keep passengers safe, and the word they used was lucky. His phone rang, the airline's VP of operations. Julian answered. What the hell happened on Flight 417? Caleb Mortimer's voice was tight. I've got a crew member in custody, videos going viral, and my entire PR team screaming. What happened? Julian said slowly. Is that one of your flight attendants stabbed my 13-year-old son? Silence. Then, Julian, I need you to be very careful about what you say publicly. We have protocols. Your protocols put a psychopath in uniform. That's not fair. Price had an exemplary record. Then, your records are lies. Julian stood, pacing. How many complaints did he have? That's personnel information. How many, Caleb? A pause. 4, over 6 years. All resolved through additional training. Julian's vision tunneled. 4 people reported him, and you put him back on planes. The complaints were minor. Tone issues. Nothing physical, because the ones who experienced physical violence were too scared to report. You built a system that protected him, not passengers. Julian's voice dropped. My son almost died because you prioritized your employee retention numbers over safety. Julian, you're emotional. I understand. But we need to think strategically. I am thinking strategically. I'm thinking about how every news outlet in the country is going to cover this. I'm thinking about the FA investigation that starts tomorrow. I'm thinking about how many other Elis are out there, scared and bleeding, because we failed them. He paused. And I'm thinking about how I'm going to make sure this never happens again. Don't do anything rash. Julian hung up. In recovery, Eli drifted in and out of consciousness, morphine softening the edges of pain. When his eyes finally focused, his mother was there. Simone had caught an emergency flight from Chicago, her face wet with tears. Mom, shh, baby, don't talk. She kissed his forehead, hands trembling. Just rest. I tried to be brave. Simone's face crumpled. You are. This wasn't about bravery. This was about a monster who hurt you. Julian entered, carrying coffee he wouldn't drink. He pulled up a chair beside Simone. Police want a statement when you're ready, he told Eli. No rush. Tomorrow's fine. Will they believe me? Eli's voice was small. They already do. Julian squeezed his hand. Marcus Hale gave them the video. It's evidence. Real, undeniable evidence. Who's Marcus? The man who recorded what happened. He's the reason Price is in handcuffs instead of still serving drinks. Eli absorbed this. A stranger had helped him, had seen and acted when everyone else looked away. Can I thank him? He's waiting outside, been there for 2 hours. Marcus entered hesitantly, hands shoved in pockets. He looked younger than his 43 years, face drawn with exhaustion. Hey, he said softly. You helped me. Eli's words were slurred from medication, but clear enough. Marcus's eyes reddened. I should have helped sooner. The second I saw him hurt you. You recorded. You spoke up. That's more than anyone else did. Eli paused. Why? Because, Marcus said, voice rough. I have a nephew your age, and if someone hurt him and people just watched, I'd never forgive them. Couldn't forgive myself for being one of those people. They sat in silence. Outside, a hospital announcement echoed down the corridor. Finally, Marcus spoke again. What he did to you, the threats, the manipulation, that's not on you. You know that, right? Eli nodded, unconvincing. I mean it. Predators are good at making victims feel responsible. But you dropped a fork. That's all. The rest is on him. After Marcus left, Eli stared at the ceiling. His leg throbbed despite medication. His mind replayed the whisper, the smile, the casual cruelty. He'd been alone up there, surrounded by people, utterly alone. Dad? Yeah, buddy. How many other kids has he hurt? Julian had been dreading this question. I don't know yet, but you're going to find out. Yes. And then, Julian met his son's eyes. Then I'm going to burn down every system that protected him. The video hit social media while Eli was in surgery. Someone on the flight had recorded Marcus's phone screen, sharing the footage before deplaning. By midnight, Skyreach scandal was trending. By morning, every major news outlet had covered it. The clip played on loop, Price's hand moving, Eli's silent scream, the aftermath. Public outrage was immediate and volcanic. Passengers shared their own stories of aggressive crew members, of complaints ignored, of being told to sit down and be quiet. The pattern was undeniable. Skyreach's PR team went into crisis mode. They issued a statement. We take all allegations seriously and are conducting a thorough investigation. It landed like gasoline on fire. Social media tore it apart. Activists called for boycotts. Pilots and flight attendants from other airlines spoke up about industry-wide problems with accountability. Senator Patricia Hammond saw the video during a committee meeting and immediately called for congressional hearings. If airlines can't protect children, she told reporters, then Congress will. In a holding cell, Price watched the news coverage, disbelief morphing into panic. His lawyer, a public defender who'd seen the video and already looked defeated, laid out the situation. They're charging you with assault with a deadly weapon, child endangerment, and abuse of authority. The video is damning. If you want any chance at a plea, I want charges dropped. That kid provoked me. Stop. The lawyer closed her folder. The jury will see you stab a child and threaten him. There is no universe where he provoked me plays well. Then what am I supposed to do? Pray for a lenient judge, because you're going to prison. Price slumped against the wall. 8 years with the airline. 8 years of maintaining control, of keeping passengers in line, of doing his job. And one mistake, one moment of losing his temper, had destroyed everything. Except it wasn't one moment. Deep down, in a place he wouldn't examine, Price knew that. He'd grabbed passengers before. Twisted arms. Used his authority to intimidate. He'd just never been caught. At Skyreach headquarters, Caleb Mortimer sat across from the CEO, Diane Reeves. The video played on her laptop. She watched it 3 times without expression, then closed the screen. How did this happen? Her voice was ice. Price had complaints, but nothing that met the threshold. 4 complaints. 4 separate passengers said he was aggressive, and we did nothing. We provided additional training. We covered our asses. Diane stood, pacing. We took the path that cost less money and exposed us to less liability. And now a child is in the hospital, and our stock is down 18%. Mortimer shifted uncomfortably. The union will argue we followed protocol. The protocol is broken. That's the problem. Diane turned to face him. Who approved putting Price back on active duty after the 3rd complaint? Mortimer's silence was answer. Enough. You're suspended, effective immediately. Diane pressed her intercom. "Get me legal and HR, and someone find out how many other crew members have multiple complaints." The answer came back within hours. 17 crew members across Skyreach's fleet had 3 or more complaints. 9 had 5 or more. All were still flying. Diane stared at the report, nausea rising. They'd built a system that protected employees over passengers, that valued smooth operations over safety, that punished whistleblowers and ignored victims. Julian Carter had been right. The rot went deeper than one violent flight attendant. It was cultural, structural, and now undeniable. She picked up her phone and called Julian directly. "We need to talk," she said. "Not as your boss, as someone who wants to fix this." Julian listened to her outline preliminary reforms, independent complaint reviews, mandatory reporting, crew retraining. When she finished, he asked one question. "Will you testify before Congress?" "What?" "Senator Hammond is convening hearings. If you're serious about fixing this, you'll testify under oath about what went wrong and how you'll change it." Diane hesitated. Testifying meant exposure, liability, risk. But staying silent meant complicity. "I'll testify," she said. Detective Sarah Ortiz arrived at the hospital the next morning with her partner, a quiet man named Chen, who took notes in precise shorthand. They found Eli awake, staring at breakfast he couldn't eat. Simone sat beside him, protective as a shield. "We can come back," Ortiz said gently. "No." Eli's voice was steady despite the tremor in his hands. "I want to do this." Ortiz settled into a chair, her recorder visible on the table. "Tell me what happened. Start from when you boarded." Eli walked them through it. The routine boarding, finding his seat, the dropped fork. Then, Price's approach, the sudden violence, the whispered threats. His voice only cracked once, when he described believing no one would help him. "Did anyone else on the crew respond to your injury?" Chen asked. "A younger attendant looked at me, but she walked away." "Did she say anything?" "That she'd inform the crew lead." Eli paused, but the crew lead was him. Ortiz and Chen exchanged glances. "We'll need to interview her," Ortiz said, "and every other crew member on that flight." After they left, Eli turned to his mother. "What if they say I'm lying?" "Baby, there's video evidence, witnesses, medical records. Nobody's going to say you're lying." But Eli had learned something on that plane. People believed what was convenient, and believing a flight attendant over a passenger was always more convenient. The investigation moved fast. By afternoon, detectives had interviewed 7 crew members from Flight 417. Their statements varied wildly. 2 claimed they saw nothing. 3 admitted they noticed Eli bleeding but assumed it was an accident. 1, the young attendant, broke down crying. "I knew something was wrong," she told Ortiz, voice shaking. "But Price runs that cabin like his personal kingdom. If you question him, he makes your life hell. Files complaints, gets you written up. So we all just look away." "How long has this been going on?" "Since I started. 2 years ago." Ortiz leaned forward. "Has he hurt other passengers?" The attendant hesitated. "I don't know for sure, but I've seen him grab people's arms too hard, yank bags away from passengers. Once he spilled hot coffee on a man who complained about service. Called it an accident." "Did you report any of this?" "I tried once. My supervisor told me Price was old school, and I needed to toughen up." Ortiz added another name to her growing list of people who'd enabled Price's behavior. Mature. Skyreach headquarters. Julian convened an emergency meeting with the flight operations team. 15 managers and supervisors sat around the conference table, most looking uncomfortable. "I want every complaint filed against Price," Julian said without preamble. "Physical files, digital records, verbal reports, everything." "Some of those are confidential," someone began. "Not anymore." Julian's tone left no room for debate. "A child was stabbed on our aircraft. Confidentiality died the moment that happened." The files arrived within an hour. Julian spread them across the table. 4 formal complaints. But beneath those, he found notes, informal documentation of concerns that had never been escalated. A passenger who said Price grabbed her mother roughly. A man who reported being threatened when he asked for water. A teenager who complained about creepy behavior. 12 incidents over 6 years. None investigated beyond a supervisor's conversation with Price. Who signed off on these? Julian asked, though he already knew. Caleb Mortimer's name appeared on most. Others bore different signatures, managers who'd since transferred or retired. But the pattern was consistent. Receive complaint, talk to Price, accept his explanation, close file. Julian looked up at the assembled team. Every person in this room who knew about these complaints and did nothing is complicit. You prioritized operational continuity over passenger safety. You created an environment where a predator could thrive. Several managers stared at their hands. One woman spoke up. We were following HR protocol. Then the protocol is garbage. Julian gathered the files. I'm forwarding all of this to the police, the FAA, and Senator Hammond's office. And I'm recommending termination for anyone who knowingly buried complaints. You can't fire half the operations team. Watch me. The backlash was immediate. By evening, Julian had received 3 calls from the airline's lawyers warning him about wrongful termination suits. The pilots' union called expressing support. The flight attendants' union remained conspicuously silent. Diane Reeves summoned Julian to her office. She looked like she hadn't slept. You're burning the company down. Good, it needs to burn. Julian, I understand you're angry. My son was tortured on one of our planes. Anger doesn't begin to cover it. He leaned forward. How many other Elis are out there? How many passengers have we failed because we were too worried about bad press or operational disruptions? Diane met his gaze. Too many. Then help me fix it, or get out of my way. She studied him for a long moment. What do you need? Independent oversight. Real consequences for crew misconduct. Transparency, and everyone who buried complaints. Gone. The board won't approve mass terminations. Then I'll testify about the board's complicity. Julian pulled out his phone, showing her an email. Senator Hammond asked me to appear at the hearings. I said yes. Diane's eyes widened. You're testifying against your own company. I'm testifying for the truth. He stood. The question is whether you'll stand with me or against me. That night, Eli woke screaming. Simone was there instantly, holding him while he sobbed. He's going to come back. He said he'd find me. He's in jail, baby. He can't hurt you. But he knows my name. He knows Dad works here. He'll spend the next 20 years in prison if I have anything to say about it. Julian appeared in the doorway. He'd been sleeping in a chair in the corner, keeping watch. Eli's breathing slowed, but his eyes remained wide with fear. I can't stop seeing his face. Julian sat on the edge of the bed. That's normal. It's going to take time. How much time? I don't know, buddy. But we'll get you help. Therapy. Whatever you need. What if it never stops? Julian didn't have an answer for that. He just held his son and wished he could absorb the trauma himself. The arraignment happened 3 days later. Price appeared in an orange jumpsuit, wrists shackled, the confident swagger replaced by hunched shoulders. The judge read the charges: assault with a deadly weapon, child endangerment, abuse of authority, making criminal threats. How does the defendant plead? Price's lawyer stood. Not guilty, Your Honor. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Julian's hands clenched into fists. Marcus, sitting in the gallery, shook his head in disbelief. The prosecutor objected to bail. The defendant used his position of authority to assault a minor, then threatened him to ensure silence. He's a flight risk, literally, and a danger to passengers. The defense argued Price had ties to the community, no prior criminal record, and a right to due process. The judge listened impassively. Bail is denied. The defendant will remain in custody pending trial. The gavel fell. Price's face went white. He twisted toward his lawyer, mouth moving silently, but the bailiff was already leading him away. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed Julian. "How do you feel about the not guilty plea?" "I feel like the justice system will do its job." "Will you attend the trial?" "Every day." "What do you say to other parents worried about airline safety?" Julian looked directly into the cameras. "I say we've failed you. Airlines have prioritized profits and efficiency over the safety and dignity of passengers. That ends now. I'm committed to ensuring no other child experiences what my son did." "Even if it costs you your job?" "Especially then." The clip went viral within an hour. Passengers flooded social media with stories of airline abuse. Flight attendants, emboldened by Julian's stand, began speaking up about toxic crew cultures and managers who punished reports of misconduct. The dam had broken. Senator Hammond convened her hearing 2 weeks later. The room was packed with journalists, aviation industry representatives, and concerned citizens. Eli sat in the front row between his parents, his legs still in a brace. Hammond opened with a statement that made several airline executives shift uncomfortably. "We are here because systems failed. A child was brutalized because adults with authority chose convenience over courage, silence over safety. Today, we examine those failures, and we demand accountability." The first witness was the FAA inspector who'd reviewed Skyreach's complaint procedures. His testimony was damning. The airline had no functional process for escalating crew misconduct complaints. Reports were reviewed by the crew members' direct supervisors, creating an obvious conflict of interest. In effect, they'd built a system designed to protect employees from consequences. "Did you find similar issues at other airlines?" Hammond asked. "Yes, Senator. This is an industry-wide problem." Next came Marcus Hale. He walked the committee through the assault, his decision to record, and the aftermath. "I almost didn't act," he admitted. "I was afraid of being sued for recording, afraid of causing a scene. But then I thought about living with myself if I did nothing, and fear became irrelevant." "What would you say to other witnesses of misconduct?" Senator Martinez asked. "That silence protects predators. Every time we look away, we give them permission to hurt someone else." Then Julian took the stand. He didn't read from prepared remarks. He spoke from memory and fury. "My son loved flying, past tense, because Landon Price didn't just stab him with a fork. He stabbed his trust in the world, his belief that adults would protect him, his faith that speaking up matters." Julian's voice remained steady despite the emotion behind it. "And Price could do that because we, the airline industry, created an environment where crew authority was absolute and passenger vulnerability was ignored." "Did you know about prior complaints against Price?" Hammond asked. "Not until after the assault, but I should have. Anyone in operations management should have. The fact that we didn't speaks to a deliberate failure of communication and accountability." "What changes are you implementing?" Julian outlined the reforms he'd drafted with Diane's reluctant approval. Independent complaint review boards, mandatory reporting with whistleblower protections, psychological evaluations for crew members with multiple complaints, body cameras for flight attendants on international flights. "Some will say these measures are extreme," Julian concluded. "I say they're overdue. If my son's suffering can prevent another child's trauma, then the pain has purpose." When Julian stepped down, Eli squeezed his hand. "You didn't have to say that," Eli whispered. "About me loving flying. It's the truth." "Past tense is right." Eli looked toward the witness table where he'd soon sit. "I don't know if I'll ever feel safe on a plane again." "Then we drive," Julian said simply. "Or take trains, whatever you need." Senator Hammond called Eli next. The room quieted as he walked to the stand, his limp visible despite physical therapy. A clerk adjusted the microphone down to his height. Cameras zoomed in. Eli's hands trembled as he placed them on the table. Hammond's voice softened. "Eli, thank you for being here. I know this is difficult. Take your time with every question." Eli nodded, throat tight. "Can you tell the committee what happened on Flight 417? Eli recounted the assault in halting sentences. The dropped fork, Price's sudden violence, the whispered threats. As he spoke, Several senators leaned forward, expressions hardening. One woman in the gallery began crying silently. "When you were injured and bleeding," Hammond asked, "did anyone help you immediately?" "No, ma'am. People looked, but nobody came." "Why do you think that was?" Eli considered. "Because he was the authority. He had the uniform, the position, and I was just a kid." "Who believes the kid?" Eli asked. "Who believes the kid?" You can answer that question right now. Smash that like button to show you believe survivors. Subscribe, because stories like this need amplification, not silence. And share this, because every share tells another Eli that someone's listening. 30 seconds of your time. That's all I'm asking. He gave years of his childhood. You can give 30 seconds. The question hung in the air, indicting everyone. What did you feel in that moment? Alone. Eli's voice cracked. Like I was invisible. Like even if I screamed, nobody would care enough to stop him. Hammond let the silence stretch before asking her final question. If you could say something to other young people who've experienced abuse of authority, what would it be? Eli looked past the senators, past the cameras, toward some future kid in his position. Tell someone, even if you're scared, even if they threaten you, because staying silent protects them, not you, and you deserve protection. Applause broke out before the gavel could stop it. Hammond allowed it for several seconds before restoring order. As Eli left the stand, he locked eyes with Diane Reeves in the gallery. She nodded once, acknowledging the weight of his words. The committee then called the young flight attendant from Flight 417, Tara Nichols. She'd quit Skyreach the day after giving her police statement, unable to face another shift under their system. "Ms. Nichols," Senator Martinez began, "you testified that Landon Price created a hostile work environment. Can you elaborate? He controlled everything on his flights. Who got promoted from economy? Who received extra service? Who got reported for minor complaints? He filed grievances against crew members who questioned him. Most of us learned to just stay out of his way. Did you report his behavior to management?" "Once. I told my supervisor that Price had grabbed a passenger's wrist too hard during boarding. She said passengers exaggerate, and that Price's seniority meant I should defer to his judgment." "So reporting up the chain was futile. Worse than futile. It made you a target." Tara's voice steadied with anger. 2 weeks after I reported him, I was written up for a uniform violation, a violation I'd had for months without issue. The message was clear: stay quiet or face consequences. Senator Hammond leaned forward. "And on Flight 417, when you saw Eli bleeding?" Tara's eyes filled. "I knew Price had done something. I could see it in the boy's face, in the way Price was performing concern. But I was terrified. If I challenged him publicly and was wrong, my career was over. If I was right..." She swallowed. "If I was right and spoke up, he'd destroy me anyway. So you chose silence." "Yes." Tears spilled over, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life. The testimony from other airlines' employees followed. A United flight attendant described a pilot who routinely berated crew members and received only token discipline. An American gate agent spoke of supervisors who punished employees for processing passenger complaints. A Delta pilot detailed how reporting safety concerns led to scheduling retaliation. The pattern was undeniable. Airlines had built cultures where authority was unquestionable and accountability was absent. Diane Reeves took the stand late in the afternoon. She'd prepared extensively, but no preparation could soften what she had to admit. "Ms. Reeves," Hammond began, "you became CEO of Skyreach 3 years ago. Were you aware of the complaint system's failures?" "Not specifically, Senator. But I was aware that our employee retention metrics were strong and our passenger complaint resolution times were fast." "Fast resolution or fast dismissal?" Diane's pause was damning. "In retrospect, the latter." "In retrospect." Hammond's tone could freeze water. "A child was stabbed under your watch. Multiple complaints about the perpetrator were ignored under your leadership. At what point does in retrospect become willful negligence?" "Senator, I take full responsibility. That's not an answer. Did you or did you not prioritize operational efficiency over passenger safety? Diane met Hammond's gaze. Yes, we did. I did. The admission sent shockwaves through the room. CEOs didn't confess to negligence under oath, but Diane had decided that survival required truth, not spin. Walk us through the decision-making, Hammond pressed. Why were complaints buried? Because addressing them properly, investigating thoroughly, removing crew members pending review, disrupted operations. Disruptions cost money. They affected on-time performance metrics that determined executive bonuses. So we implemented a system that resolved complaints quickly, usually in the crew members' favor, to minimize disruption. At what cost? At the cost of passenger safety, at the cost of vulnerable people like Eli Carter. Senator Martinez jumped in. You're testifying that your executive compensation was tied to metrics that incentivized ignoring complaints? Yes. And the board approved this structure? The board designed it. Diane was burning bridges in real time, and she knew it. But Julian's words echoed, I'm testifying for the truth. She would do the same, even if it ended her career. Hammond's final question was pointed. What should Congress do to prevent this from happening at other airlines? Mandate independent oversight of all crew misconduct complaints. Remove financial incentives that reward speed over thoroughness. Create federal protections for crew members who report safety concerns. And establish real penalties for executives who knowingly maintain unsafe systems, even if it costs you your job. Especially then. The hearing adjourned shortly after. Reporters mobbed Diane outside, but she declined comment. Julian found her in a quiet corridor, looking drained. That took courage, he said. It took shame. Diane leaned against the wall. I spent 3 years optimizing profits while people suffered. Eli's testimony made that impossible to hide. What happens now? The board will probably fire me. Shareholders will sue. But at least I told the truth. She looked at him. You were right. The company needed to burn. Not the company, the rot inside it. They stood in silence until Simone appeared. Eli beside her. The boy looked exhausted. Dark circles under his eyes. But his shoulders were straighter than they'd been in weeks. I did it, Eli said quietly. You did, Julian agreed. You were incredible. Can we go home now? Yeah, buddy, we can go home. But home felt different now. The house was the same, Eli's room unchanged, but the world had shifted. Eli saw it in the way people stared at grocery stores, recognized him from news coverage. Some approached with sympathy. Others kept their distance, as if trauma were contagious. School was worse. Kids whispered, teachers treated him like glass. During lunch, a classmate asked if he was the fork kid. Eli left, his tray untouched, and spent the rest of the period in the bathroom, breathing through panic. His therapist, Dr. Chen, worked with him twice weekly. Trauma doesn't have a timeline, she explained during one session. Your brain is processing a threat. It's going to take time to convince it the threat is gone. What if it never feels gone? Then we learn to live with it. Trauma doesn't erase who you were, Eli. It adds complexity, depth. You're not broken. You're changed. Eli wasn't sure he believed her, but he kept showing up. Julian threw himself into reform work. He partnered with passenger advocacy groups, consulted with child safety experts, and drafted policy proposals. His days stretched to 16 hours. Simone worried he was avoiding his own trauma by fixing systems, but Julian insisted the work was necessary. I can't undo what happened to Eli, he told her late one night, but I can prevent it from happening to someone else's child. And what about your child? The one who needs his father present, not perpetually fighting battles. Julian had no answer for that. Meanwhile, Price's trial date approached. His lawyer attempted plea negotiations, reduced charges in exchange for testimony about Skyreach's culture. Prosecutors refused. The case was too high profile, the video evidence too clear. This was going to trial, and Price was going to lose. In his cell, Price had hours to reflect. He told himself the kid had been disrespectful, that passengers needed discipline, that he'd been defending standards in a world gone soft. But late at night, when defenses crumbled, he remembered Eli's face. Terrified, betrayed, small. He'd hurt a child. He'd enjoyed the power of it. And no justification could erase that. The story had become a national conversation. Airlines rushed to announce reforms. Some were substantive. Independent review boards, whistleblower protections. Others were performative. New mission statements and diversity training that changed nothing structural. Senator Hammond introduced the Airline Passenger Protection Act, comprehensive legislation mandating oversight, transparency, and accountability. The airline industry lobbied hard against it, warning of increased costs and operational challenges. Hammond's response was public and blunt. If protecting children increases your costs, your business model is immoral. The bill gained momentum. Support came from unlikely places. Pilots' unions tired of covering for dangerous colleagues. Flight attendants desperate for cultures that valued safety over silence. Passengers who'd stayed quiet too long. Marcus Hale became an accidental activist. Interviewed by dozens of outlets, he repeated the same message. Witnessing isn't enough. I could have recorded and done nothing. Could have told myself someone else would handle it. But there is no someone else. There's just us. Choosing courage or complicity. His words resonated. Social media filled with stories of intervention. Passengers defending each other. Employees reporting misconduct despite retaliation fears. Bystanders who'd stopped being bystanders. The culture was shifting, slowly, painfully, but undeniably. The trial began on a cold March morning, 4 months after the assault. The courthouse was packed, overflow crowds watching on monitors in adjacent rooms. Eli sat between his parents in the front row, wearing a button-down shirt that felt too tight around his collar. He'd barely slept, nightmares jolting him awake every few hours. Price entered in a suit his lawyer had chosen, meant to make him look professional and sympathetic. It didn't work. The jury, 8 women, 4 men, watched him with undisguised suspicion as he sat at the defense table, spine rigid. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Lisa Fernandez, opened with stark simplicity. The defendant stabbed a 13-year-old boy with a fork, then threatened him into silence. We have video evidence, medical records, witness testimony. This isn't complicated. It's assault, caught on camera, with the defendant's voice clearly audible making threats. She turned to face the jury. The defense will try to muddy waters that are crystal clear. Don't let them. Price's attorney, a rumpled man named Paul Hendricks, stood for his opening. Landon Price served Skyreach Airlines for 8 years with distinction. He maintained order and safety on hundreds of flights. On November 3rd, a situation escalated beyond his training. Was his response appropriate? No. But intent matters. This was a moment of poor judgment, not premeditated violence. Eli's hands clenched. Poor judgment. As if stabbing someone was like choosing the wrong tie. The prosecution called witnesses methodically. The paramedic who'd treated Eli at the gate testified about the severity of the wound. The fork had penetrated 3 inches. The angle suggested deliberate force, not an accident. The emergency room doctor described the surgery. We worried about nerve damage. Another centimeter medial and he would have bled out before landing. Then Marcus took the stand. He walked the jury through what he'd seen, voice steady despite obvious discomfort with the attention. Fernandez played the video on screens positioned throughout the courtroom. Even knowing what was coming, several jurors flinched when the fork drove in. "Why did you record?" Fernandez asked. "Because I knew no one would believe it otherwise. Flight attendants have authority. Passengers don't. Without evidence, it would have been Eli's word against Price's. And who would people have believed?" Marcus met Price's gaze. The uniform. They always believe the uniform. Cross-examination was brutal. Hendricks attacked Marcus's motives. "Isn't it true you've spoken at multiple advocacy events since this incident?" "Yes." "Been paid for those appearances?" "I've received honorariums to cover travel expenses." "So you've profited from this video?" I've shared my experience to prevent other assaults. Marcus's voice hardened. If you think a few $100s makes up for watching a child get stabbed, you're delusional. The judge sustained the prosecution's objection, but Hendricks had planted doubt. That was his job. Tara Nichols testified next, describing Price's pattern of intimidation. He ruled through fear. Crew members who challenged him faced retaliation, bad schedules, negative reviews, isolation from the team. Did you witness the assault? No, I was in the galley, but I saw Eli bleeding afterward, saw his face, and I saw Price's, calm, controlled, like nothing unusual had happened. What did you do? Tara's voice dropped. Nothing. I walked away. Why? Because I was afraid, and that makes me complicit. On cross, Hendricks pushed. You're testifying against Mr. Price because you feel guilty about your own inaction, correct? I'm testifying because he stabbed a child and threatened him. My guilt is separate, but it motivates your testimony. What motivates my testimony is that I stayed silent once. I won't do it again. The prosecution rested after 3 days of testimony. The evidence was overwhelming. Video, witnesses, medical records, Price's own voice on the recording making threats. The defense had nothing to counter with except character witnesses who described Price as dedicated and professional. Then Hendricks made a gamble. He called Price to the stand. It was a mistake. Price started strong, describing his years of service, his training, his commitment to passenger safety. But under cross-examination, Fernandez dismantled him. You grabbed Eli's arm before stabbing him, correct? I was attempting to get his attention. By grabbing a child, passengers need to understand when they've made mistakes. Dropping a fork is a mistake that requires physical intervention. It disrupted service in first class, so you assaulted him over a service disruption. Fernandez's tone was surgical. Let's watch the video again. Price's jaw tightened as the footage played. Fernandez paused at the moment of impact. Does that look like you're getting someone's attention, Mr. Price? It happened quickly. Did you intend to stab him? Price hesitated, sensing the trap. I intended to maintain order. With a fork? It wasn't planned. The fork was there and you used it as a weapon against a child. Fernandez moved closer. Then you leaned in and whispered something. What did you say? I don't recall exactly. We have audio enhancement. Would you like me to play it? Price's composure cracked. I told him to be more careful. Fernandez nodded to the prosecution table. An analyst pressed play. Price's voice filled the courtroom. Crystal clear. If you say anything, I'll say you attacked me. Who do you think they'll believe? That's not telling him to be careful, Mr. Price. That's threatening a wounded child into silence. I was upset. You were calculating. You knew you'd crossed a line, and you tried to cover it up by terrorizing your victim. Price had no response. The silence stretched until the judge prompted him. Mr. Price, I made a mistake. A mistake, Fernandez repeated. Is that what you call stabbing someone? I didn't mean to hurt him that badly, but you meant to hurt him. The admission hung there, damning and irrevocable. Closing arguments were brief. Fernandez reminded the jury of the evidence, the premeditation revealed in Price's threats, the abuse of authority. Hendricks argued for leniency, for understanding the pressures of the job, the split-second nature of the incident. The jury deliberated for 90 minutes. When they returned, the foreperson stood. On the charge of assault with a deadly weapon, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of child endangerment, guilty. On the charge of making criminal threats, guilty. Price's face went gray. Eli exhaled, a sound that was half sob, half relief. Julian pulled him close while Simone gripped both their hands. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. Character witnesses begged for mercy. Price's mother testified through tears that her son wasn't a monster. His ex-wife was notably absent. The judge listened to it all before speaking. Mr. Price, you held a position of trust and authority. You were responsible for passenger safety. Instead, You weaponized your position to harm a vulnerable child, then attempted to silence him through threats. This wasn't a momentary lapse. It was a choice, followed by additional choices to cover your actions and blame your victim. She paused, looking at Eli. The victim in this case showed remarkable courage. He testified despite trauma. He faced his attacker. He told his truth. You showed no such courage, only cowardice. I sentence you to 12 years in state prison, with eligibility for parole after 8. Additionally, you are permanently barred from any position of authority over minors or in the transportation industry. The gavel fell. Price was led away in handcuffs, shoulders shaking. Eli watched him go, feeling nothing close to triumph, just exhaustion and the faint hope that this part, at least, was over. Outside, reporters swarmed. Julian gave a brief statement. Justice was served today, but the work isn't finished. Airlines must continue reforming their cultures and systems to prevent this from happening again. A reporter pushed forward. Eli, how do you feel? Eli looked into the camera, words coming slowly. I feel like maybe other kids won't have to go through this, and that's something. The Airline Passenger Protection Act passed Congress 3 weeks later with bipartisan support. It mandated independent oversight boards, whistleblower protections, and severe penalties for airlines that failed to address misconduct reports. Airlines grumbled about implementation costs, but complied, knowing public sentiment had turned decisively against them. Skyreach became a case study in corporate reform. Diane Reeves survived a no-confidence vote by one board member and immediately implemented sweeping changes. Caleb Mortimer and 4 other executives were terminated. The complaint review system was scrapped and rebuilt with external oversight. Body cameras were issued to crew members on international flights. Most significantly, Julian Carter was promoted to Chief Safety Officer, a newly created position with authority to override operational decisions in the name of passenger protection. You're asking me to be the person everyone hates, Julian said when offered the job. I'm asking you to be the person who prevents another Eli, Diane replied. He accepted. The cultural shift was slow and uneven. Some crew members embraced the changes, relieved to work in an environment that valued safety over silence. Others resisted, complaining about micromanagement and loss of autonomy. Julian listened to the complaints and didn't budge. You don't get autonomy to hurt people, he told one angry supervisor. That's not autonomy, that's impunity. Gradually, the complaints decreased. Incidents were reported, investigated, and addressed. Crew members who witnessed misconduct knew they could speak up without retaliation. Passengers noticed the difference in how complaints were handled, in crew interactions, in the feeling of being heard rather than dismissed. It wasn't perfect. Systems built over decades couldn't transform overnight, but the trajectory had changed, and that mattered. Eli's recovery was harder to measure. Physically, his leg healed. The scar was permanent but faded over time. Emotionally, progress came in fits and starts. Some days he felt almost normal. Others, a sudden movement or raised voice would send him spiraling into panic. Dr. Chen worked with him on grounding techniques, on separating past trauma from present safety. Your brain learned that authority figures can hurt you without consequence, she explained. We have to teach it that's not always true. But it was true, Eli said. For months, nobody stopped him. Until someone did. Marcus stopped him. Your father stopped him. The justice system stopped him. You're not powerless, Eli. You never were. Eli wanted to believe that. Some days, he almost did. 6 months after the trial, Eli walked into an airport for the first time since the assault. Not to fly, he wasn't ready for that, but to meet with passenger advocacy groups Julian had invited to Skyreach headquarters. Eli had agreed reluctantly, wanting to support his father's work even as his stomach twisted with dread. The terminal smelled the same. Recycled air, coffee, jet fuel seeping through ventilation. His breath quickened. Julian noticed immediately. "We can leave," Julian said quietly. "No." Eli forced his feet forward. I need to do this. They passed security, walked through the concourse. Eli's eyes tracked every flight attendant, every uniform, his body tensed for threat. But nothing happened. People moved around him, oblivious, caught in their own travel stress. The world kept turning. At the conference room, a dozen advocates waited. They'd all been victims or witnesses of airline misconduct. A woman whose wheelchair had been damaged through negligence. A man who'd been forcibly removed for speaking Arabic. A mother whose autistic son had been humiliated by crew members who didn't understand his needs. "We wanted to meet you," the woman in the wheelchair said. Her name was Sandra. "What happened to you? It gave us language for our own experiences. Made us realize we weren't crazy for being angry." Eli shifted uncomfortably. "I didn't do anything special." "You testified. You faced your attacker. You didn't take the settlement and disappear." Sandra rolled closer. "That gave the rest of us permission to speak up too." Over the next hour, they shared stories that made Eli's chest ache with recognition. The powerlessness, the gaslighting, the way systems protected institutions over individuals. But they also shared victories. Policies changed, crew members fired, apologies issued. Small wins that collectively represented cultural shift. "It's not enough yet," a man named David said, "but it's more than we had before you." Eli realized something sitting there. His trauma hadn't just been personal. It had been systemic. Price was one man, but the culture that enabled him existed across the industry. By speaking out, Eli had exposed machinery most passengers never saw. And once exposed, it couldn't hide again. "I still can't fly," Eli admitted. "Don't know if I ever will." "That's okay," Sandra said. "Healing isn't linear, and you've already done more than most people do in a lifetime." After the meeting, Julian walked Eli through the terminal. They stopped at a plaque near the security checkpoint, new, brass, gleaming. It read, "The Carter Passenger Safety Initiative. Speak up, be heard, stay safe." One video changed an industry. One testimony saved countless passengers. One share from you reaches hundreds of people who need to hear this. So, here's the deal. Like this video if you think corporate accountability matters. Subscribe if you want more stories that expose injustice. Share this if you believe silence protects predators. It's literally 3 clicks. Eli faced his attacker in court. You can face a share button. Eli stared at his own name, feeling the weight of it. Does it actually work, the reporting system? We've processed 63 complaints in 6 months. 42 resulted in crew retraining, 12 in suspensions, 3 in terminations. Julian's voice carried quiet pride. Every single complaint received independent review within 48 hours. That's a lot of complaints. That's a lot of honesty. Before passengers assumed complaining was pointless. Now they know someone's listening. They walked in silence until Eli asked the question that had haunted him. What if I'd stayed quiet, taken the threat seriously and never told anyone? Julian stopped walking. Then Price would still be flying, and he would have hurt someone else. So my pain had purpose. No. Julian turned to face him. Your pain was meaningless violence. What you did with it afterward, that had purpose. But you didn't deserve what happened to earn that purpose. The distinction mattered. Eli felt something loosen in his chest, a knot he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. Meanwhile, across the country, the ripple effects continued. Flight attendants at other airlines organized for better reporting systems. Pilots' unions demanded mental health resources and whistleblower protections. Passengers filed lawsuits citing the precedent of Eli's case, forcing settlements and policy changes. Marcus Hale found himself in unexpected demand as a speaker. Schools invited him to discuss bystander intervention. Corporate training programs wanted his perspective on workplace courage. He was uncomfortable with the attention but showed up anyway. I'm not a hero, he told a high school assembly in Denver. I just did what anyone should do. The real question isn't why I acted, it's why everyone else didn't. A student raised her hand. But what if acting puts you at risk? Then you weigh the risk. Sometimes staying safe means someone else stays in danger. You have to decide what you can live with. Marcus paused. I couldn't live with watching a kid suffer and doing nothing. That risk, the one to my conscience, felt bigger than any legal or social risk. The students absorbed this. One approached afterward. My stepdad hits my mom. I've never told anyone because I'm scared he'll get worse. Marcus knelt to the kid's level. That's different from what I faced. Domestic violence is dangerous and complex, but you should tell a counselor here or call a hotline. You can't fix it alone, but you don't have to stay silent alone either. The kid nodded, eyes wet. Marcus gave him a hotline number and watched him walk away, hoping he'd use it. Back at Skyreach, the cultural transformation was tested when a senior pilot was accused of harassing flight attendants. Before the Carter Initiative, such accusations might have been buried. Now they triggered immediate investigation. Julian oversaw the process personally. The pilot, a 30-year veteran named Rick Thompson, denied everything. These women are lying because they don't like my management style. Management style, Julian repeated, reviewing the complaints. Is that what you call commenting on a flight attendant's body? Cornering her in the galley? Those are exaggerations. We have statements from 6 different crew members spanning 2 years. Either you're the unluckiest man in aviation, or you're a harasser. Julian closed the file. You're suspended pending independent review. Thompson's lawyer threatened to sue. The pilots' union reluctantly backed Thompson, citing due process concerns. Julian stood firm. Due process doesn't mean protection from consequences. It means fair investigation. That's what he'll get. The independent board reviewed the case and found sufficient evidence to terminate Thompson. He sued for wrongful termination. Discovery revealed additional victims who'd been too scared to come forward before. Thompson's case collapsed. The union issued a statement supporting the termination. It was a watershed moment. The old guard realized the culture had genuinely shifted. Authority alone couldn't protect them anymore. Eli returned to school in the fall, determined to reclaim normalcy. It was harder than he'd anticipated. Other students treated him like a curiosity. Some sympathetic, others voyeuristic. A girl in his English class asked to see his scar. A boy wanted to know if he'd gotten a big settlement. Leave him alone. Eli's friend Marcus, no relation to Marcus, Hale, though Eli appreciated the nominative coincidence, said sharply, He's not a show. But Eli knew he'd always be the kid from the plane, to most people. That identity would follow him through college applications, job interviews, first dates. He could either resent it or own it. He chose ownership. When his English teacher assigned personal essays, Eli wrote about trauma and courage. Not the assault itself, he wasn't ready to relive that publicly, but about what came after, about choosing to testify despite fear, about learning that silence protected predators. His teacher asked if he'd read it aloud. Eli's hands shook holding the pages, but his voice stayed steady. When he finished, the classroom was silent. Then someone started clapping. Others joined. Eli felt his face flush, uncomfortable with praise but grateful for recognition. One afternoon, Dr. Chen asked Eli about his plans. Have you thought about what you want to do after high school? I used to want to be a pilot, Eli said. Now I don't know. Because of the assault? Because flying was Dad's thing. It felt like carrying on a legacy. But now? He struggled for words. Now I don't know what's my dream versus his. So figure out what's yours. Eli started exploring. He volunteered with a youth advocacy organization. He wrote articles for their newsletter about passenger rights. He discovered he liked investigative work, digging into systems, exposing failures, proposing solutions. I think I want to be a journalist, he told his parents at dinner one night. Investigative journalism, holding institutions accountable. Simone smiled. That makes perfect sense. Does it bother you? Eli asked Julian. That I don't want to fly? Julian reached across the table, gripping Eli's hand. I want you to do whatever makes you feel whole. If that's journalism, I'm proud. If it's accounting or Teaching or professional skateboarding, I'm proud. Your job isn't to fulfill my dreams, it's to build your own. The conversation released something Eli hadn't realized he was holding. Permission to diverge. Permission to be changed by trauma rather than defined by it. A year after the assault, Senator Hammond invited Eli to Washington for the anniversary of the Airline Passenger Protection Act's passage. It was a celebration and assessment. What had worked, what needed strengthening. Eli stood in the Senate gallery, watching Hammond speak about implementation challenges. Airlines were complying with the letter of the law, but not always the spirit. More work remained. After the session, Hammond pulled Eli aside. "How are you doing? Really?" "Better. Therapy helps. Time helps." Eli paused. "But I'm angry a lot. At Price, obviously, but also at everyone who saw warning signs and ignored them. Sometimes the anger feels too big for my body. That's normal. Righteous anger is healthy. It fuels change." Hammond smiled slightly. "Just don't let it consume you. Channel it." "How?" "Keep telling your story. Keep pushing for accountability. Keep reminding people that systems only change when we demand it." She handed him a business card. "My office is always open if you want to work on policy. Interns don't usually start until college, but I'll make an exception." Eli pocketed the card, something like hope stirring. Maybe trauma hadn't just taken from him. Maybe it had revealed capacity he hadn't known he possessed. That night, back at the hotel, Julian found Eli on the balcony overlooking the National Mall. "Penny for your thoughts. I was thinking about Price. Whether he's sorry. Does it matter?" Eli considered. "I used to think it did. That if he apologized, I could forgive him and move on. But I don't think moving on requires his remorse. I can heal whether or not he's sorry." Julian nodded slowly. "That's wisdom most adults never reach. I didn't want this wisdom. I wanted to be a normal kid." "I know, and I'm sorry you didn't get that choice." They stood together in the cooling night. Father and son, survivors of different traumas, bound by love and shared purpose. Below them, the city glittered. Seats of power where their efforts had created real change. "Do you think it's enough?" Eli asked. "What we've done?" "No," Julian said honestly. "But it's more than there was before. And if we keep pushing, it'll be more tomorrow than today. Change is incremental." "That's frustrating. Welcome to advocacy." Eli laughed despite himself, a sound that surprised them both. Laughter felt like betrayal sometimes. How could he feel joy when he still carried such pain? But Dr. Chen had taught him that healing didn't mean forgetting. It meant integrating, making space for both wound and laughter. 2 years after the assault, Eli stood in Skyreach's new training facility watching flight attendants practice de-escalation scenarios. The room hummed with serious energy as instructors role-played difficult passengers, while trainees practiced responses that prioritized safety without aggression. Julian had asked Eli to observe and provide feedback, not as the victim, but as a consultant. The request had terrified Eli initially, but he'd agreed. Avoiding airlines forever felt like letting Price win. One trainee, a young woman named Ashley, approached afterward. "Was that realistic? The scenario where the passenger gets aggressive?" "Too calm," Eli said. "Real aggression is louder, messier, and the passenger isn't always the threat." Ashley blinked. "You mean crew members?" "I mean authority can be misused anywhere. Your training should include recognizing when colleagues cross lines, not just passengers." The instructor overheard and nodded. "He's right. We'll add scenarios next week." Eli felt something unfamiliar. Not quite pride, but purpose. His experience had weight here. He could shape how future crew members understood power and vulnerability. After the session, Julian walked Eli through the facility. Photos lined the walls, diverse crew members, smiling passengers, new aircraft. But one photo stopped Eli cold. It showed a young boy boarding a plane, backpack over his shoulders, eyes bright with excitement. That was supposed to be me. Eli said quietly. Before. It still can be. Julian's voice was gentle. Not today, maybe not next year, but healing doesn't have a deadline. What if I never feel safe flying again? Then you've still healed, just differently than you expected. The distinction settled something in Eli. He'd spent months measuring recovery against an imaginary finish line. The day he could board a plane without panic. But maybe recovery meant accepting that some things changed permanently and building a life around that truth rather than fighting it. Outside, Eli watched planes taxi toward runways, their engines roaring. The sound no longer triggered immediate fear. Progress, he thought. Small, but real. Marcus Hale received a call that same week from a prosecutor in Seattle. A flight attendant there had assaulted a teenage girl, and the family wanted Marcus to testify as an expert witness on bystander intervention. "I'm not an expert," Marcus protested. "I just recorded what I saw." "That makes you an expert," the prosecutor replied. "Most people don't. You can explain why." Marcus testified about the psychological barriers to intervention. Fear of retaliation, social pressure to not cause scenes, assumption that someone else will act. His testimony helped the jury understand why other passengers hadn't intervened, which paradoxically strengthened the case against the flight attendant. The defendant was convicted. Afterward, the victim's mother hugged Marcus. "You gave my daughter's testimony weight. The defense tried to make it seem like she exaggerated because no one helped her. Your explanation showed why people don't help, not why she was lying." Marcus drove home thinking about the strange mathematics of courage. One act, pressing record on his phone, had cascaded into national reform, multiple convictions, and cultural conversations about intervention. He hadn't felt heroic that day on the plane. He'd felt terrified. But terror and courage weren't opposites. They were companions. At Skyreach, Diane Reeves announced her retirement. She'd served 3 turbulent years as CEO, transforming the company's safety culture while watching profits dip and stock prices fluctuate. The board wanted her gone, but she left on her own terms. "I came into this role believing success meant quarterly earnings," she told employees during her farewell. "I'm leaving having learned that success means passengers arriving safely and crew members working without fear. The financials will follow, or they won't, but we'll have our integrity." Julian was offered the CEO position. He declined. "I'm more useful as Chief Safety Officer. That's where I can do the most good." The board appointed someone external, a former FAA administrator with a reputation for aggressive oversight. Julian approved. The company needed someone who'd prioritize safety even when shareholders complained. Eli graduated high school with honors and acceptances to multiple journalism programs. He chose Northwestern, their investigative journalism program known for producing reporters who held power accountable. At graduation, when asked to speak as valedictorian, Eli almost declined. Public speaking still spiked his anxiety, but he'd learned that fear was information, not instruction. It told him what mattered, not what was impossible. He stood at the podium, looking at classmates who'd watched him transform from trauma victim to advocate. 4 years ago, he began, something terrible happened to me. I spent a long time believing that event defined me, that I'd always be the kid who got hurt. He paused, gathering words. But I've learned that trauma is something that happened, not something I am. What defines me is what I chose to do afterward. I chose to speak, to testify, to demand accountability. Those choices matter more than the violence that preceded them. Parents in the audience dabbed eyes. His classmates listened with rare attention. Whatever pain you've experienced, whatever injustice you've witnessed, you have choices. Stay silent or speak, hide or advocate. Let systems remain broken or demand they improve. Eli's voice strengthened. I'm not going to tell you those choices are easy. They're not. Speaking up cost me sleep, privacy, and peace of mind. But silence would have cost me more. It would have cost my integrity. He looked at his parents in the front row. Julian's face was wet with tears he didn't bother hiding. So my challenge to you is this. When you see injustice, intervene. When you witness abuse, record it. When systems fail, demand reform. You have more power than you think. I was 13 and terrified, and I still changed an industry. Imagine what you can do. The applause was thunderous. Eli stepped off the stage feeling lighter than he had in years. He'd carried the assault for so long, let it define his daily experience. But speaking about it publicly, framing it as origin rather than identity, shifted something fundamental. That summer, Eli interned at Senator Hammond's office. He researched transportation safety legislation, drafted policy briefs, and met with advocacy groups. The work was tedious often. Bureaucracy moved at glacial speed, but meaningful. One afternoon, Hammond called him into her office. "We're introducing new legislation, expanded protections for minors traveling alone. I want you to testify again." Eli's stomach dropped. "I don't know if I can. You've testified before?" "When I had to, for the trial. But this," he struggled to articulate. "Every time I tell the story publicly, I relive it. The therapy helps, but there's only so much reliving I can do before it re-traumatizes me." Hammond nodded slowly. "I understand, and I won't pressure you, but I'll say this. Your testimony carries weight that policy papers don't. People remember stories, not statistics." "Then get someone else's story. There are other victims." "You're right." Hammond smiled slightly. "I'll ask around. But Eli, you don't owe anyone your trauma. You've given enough." The permission released something Eli hadn't realized he was holding. He'd felt obligated to be the face of airline safety reform, to show up whenever asked, to prove his pain had purpose. But purpose didn't require martyrdom. He could step back, let others carry the torch. His advocacy could take different forms: research, writing, policy work that didn't require bleeding publicly. That night, he called Dr. Chen. "I think I'm ready to reduce sessions. Not stop, but scale back." "What makes you think you're ready?" "Because I can talk about the assault without dissociating. Because I'm building a life that's more than reaction to trauma. Because—" He paused. "Because I'm tired of healing being my full-time job." Dr. Chen laughed warmly. "That's possibly the healthiest thing you've ever said to me." They agreed to move to monthly sessions, with the understanding Eli could increase frequency if needed. Healing wasn't linear, but it was directional. In August, Eli visited the airport again. This time his purpose was personal. His friend's family was traveling to London, the destination Eli had been flying to when Price attacked him, and asked if Eli wanted to join. He'd stood in his bedroom staring at the invitation for an hour. Every instinct screamed no. But a quieter voice asked, "How long will you let him control where you can go?" He bought a ticket. The night before departure, panic threatened to overwhelm him. He called Marcus Hale, whose number he'd kept. "I don't know if I can do this," Eli admitted. "Then don't," Marcus said simply. "Nobody's judging you. I'm judging me. I feel like if I don't fly again, he wins." "Eli, he's in prison. You've already won." Marcus paused. "But I understand. When I flew again after that flight, I was terrified. Kept looking for threats everywhere." "How'd you get through it?" "I reminded myself that most people are decent, that one monster doesn't make every uniform dangerous. And I focused on small things, the safety card, the flight attendant's announcements, the mechanics of flight. Made it technical instead of emotional." Did it work? Eventually. Not the first flight. But by the third or fourth, I could breathe normally again. Eli absorbed this. Recovery wasn't one moment of courage. It was repeated small braveries, accumulating until they felt normal. The next morning, Julian drove him to the airport. They didn't speak much. At the terminal entrance, Eli paused. "You've got this," Julian said. "What if I don't?" "Then you turn around and we go home. No shame in that." Eli nodded and walked inside. Security was easier than expected. The agents were professional, efficient. One noticed Eli's tension and smiled kindly. "First time flying?" "First time in a while." "You'll do great." At the gate, Eli watched planes through the window. His hands trembled. He counted breaths. 1, 2, 3. The technique that had sustained him on the worst day of his life now anchoring him toward healing. Boarding was announced. Eli stood, legs unsteady, and walked down the jetway. The plane's interior smelled familiar. Recycled air, cleaning chemicals, humanity compressed into metal. His seat was in coach, middle row. Not first class. That felt safer somehow. The flight attendants were warm and professional. A woman named Jennifer did the safety demonstration with genuine care, making eye contact with passengers, projecting calm competence. This was what the job should look like, Eli thought. Protection, not power. The plane pushed back. Engines roared. Eli's chest tightened, but he kept breathing. The aircraft accelerated down the runway, physics overcoming gravity, and lifted. Eli looked out the window. Not his window. He was in the middle seat, but past his neighbor, and watched Denver shrink below. He'd flown dozens of times before Price. This should have been routine. Instead, it felt monumental. But he was doing it. Flying, reclaiming what had been stolen. The flight was uneventful. Eli read, dozed briefly, accepted water from Jennifer with a quiet, "Thank you." When turbulence hit over the Atlantic, his breathing quickened, but he didn't panic. He wrote it out, reminding himself that fear was temporary, safety was statistical, and he'd survived worse. They landed at Heathrow in the morning. Eli deplaned on shaky legs, exhausted but intact. He'd done it. In the terminal, he found a quiet corner and called his father. "I flew." Julian's voice broke. "I'm so proud of you. It was terrifying. And you did it anyway." "That's courage, Eli." Eli smiled, tears threatening. "Yeah, I guess it is." London was beautiful. History and modernity layered atop each other, resilience made architecture. Eli visited the tower, rode the Eye, ate fish and chips that were somehow better than any he'd had in Denver. His friends laughed and explored, pulling him into their joy. On the last night, standing on the Millennium Bridge watching the Thames flow beneath, Eli felt something unexpected. Peace. Not the absence of pain. That would always be there, a scar he carried. But the presence of something larger. Purpose, connection, future. He'd been stabbed, threatened, traumatized. He'd testified, advocated, changed laws. He'd fallen apart and rebuilt himself differently than before. He wasn't the same kid who'd boarded that flight 3 years ago. He was better. Scarred, but stronger. Wounded, but wiser. The flight home was easier. Eli slept through most of it, waking only as the pilot announced descent into Denver. Through the window, he watched the city appear, the sprawl, the mountains, home. Julian waited at arrivals, grinning. "Welcome back." Eli hugged him tightly. "I did it, Dad. I really did it. I never doubted you." They walked through the terminal, past the plaque bearing Eli's name, past security, into the Colorado sunshine. Eli breathed deeply, feeling possibility expand in his chest. Trauma had taken so much, but it had also revealed capacity he'd never known he possessed. The ability to endure, to speak truth, to demand accountability, to heal imperfectly but genuinely. He'd never be grateful for what Price did, but he could be grateful for who he'd become in spite of it. That was enough. That had to be enough. And as Eli walked toward the future, college, journalism, advocacy, life, he carried his story not as a weight but as a torch, illuminating the path for others still trapped in silence, still believing they were alone, still afraid their pain didn't matter. It mattered. They mattered. And Eli would spend the rest of his life making sure the world knew it.